I went from booking 3 appointments a week to 6 appointments per day after completely quitting outreach, and I'm going to show you exactly how I've done that in this video. So, there's 2 main steps that you need to actually have in order to be able to do that, and they have to be in order, and I'm going to explain how each of them work. Number 1 is proof of concept, and number 2 is scaling and automation, okay? Now, what happens to a lot of people, right, and you might be familiar with the situation, is you are in the weeds every single day. You're doing all the outreach, whether that's through cold calling, whether that's through cold DMs, whether that's through cold email, etc. And you don't know predictably, and I mean predictably, exactly how many people will book from the amount of messages that you send. And a lot of the time, the issue and the reason for that is because you are sending a different message to every single person, and you're doing this at a very personalized, unscalable level, okay? Now, there's nothing wrong with personalization, but here's the problem, okay? Is when you want to scale something, but you don't have a consistent input, right? The inputs of your system are not consistent. The outputs of your system are also not going to be consistent. So if your message for every person is like different, you're going to have a different level of appointments on your calendar, which is why you don't have a predictable process in place, and that's why you need to build something out like this, okay? So what I was able to do in order to accomplish this was essentially I had built and tested a process, right, which allowed me to get about a 1.5% booking rate, okay? What that means is 1 out of every 75 people who I sent a DM to would schedule in a call with me. The differences here between what this was and what a lot of people do is I was doing the exact same conversation every single time, right? And what I was able to do after I had accomplished that is now I had a proof of concept that I was able to scale, and I was able to completely automate, and I was able to hire out because there was a linear set of processes for every single step that allowed me to be able to do that. Okay, so being able to scale the amount of appointments is fairly easy, but you have to get the working process in place first, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so what the issue is that a lot of people do is they don't have this proof of concept yet, okay? And then because they're in so much pain, where they're spending a lot of time doing the outreach themselves, they immediately go to the shiny objects, they go to the automations, they go to the VAs, right? They go to all these like different setters and type of things, right? Without an actual proof of concept and without a linear SOP, right, of exactly what this person needs to do in order to get a predictable result. And what happens then is if they are trying to hire someone, the person that they hire, right, if they pay them commission, they're not going to get results, and then they have to fire them, and they have to repeat the whole process again. Or if they're using automation, well, that's technically fine if you have the budget for it, right? But the issue is that you have no idea whether it's going to work or not, right? Because what you've tested without automation, you don't know if that worked either, right? And one of the biggest problems and one of the biggest stupid things that I did when I started out is I spent like $3,000 on like a system that never worked in the first place, right? Like I bought the yearly plan for Apollo, which is like $1,000. I spent like 5 months figuring shit out on Instantly, trying to do cold emails. I spent all this money on these email inboxes, trying to get a VA to source all these leads for me. Like I had this whole mess of softwares and different things. But the issue was that it was built on a foundation of sand. I never did the actual email outreach myself, right? Now, what I've essentially learned from that is it's more difficult to get the proof of concept when you have to build it out yourself. But when you want to scale and when you want to actually be in a place where right now, I do zero outreach at all, and I'm in a position where I can just take sales calls. If you want to actually have that process and you want to have some predictability in your life and some predictability in your revenue, you actually have to build that out. Okay, so I'm going to go over the steps of how you build that out. But basically, one other thing I want to say, like if you want the actual proof of concept and if you want that straight from me, that I built that out over the last 5 years, you can click the first link in the description, and it's going to be all of that information as to how you can basically work with me to do that, right? Now, how you actually build this thing is not as complicated as it sounds, right? So number 1 is you need a North Star, okay? And what that means is you essentially need a number that you have in mind, right? A percentage of people to actually schedule a call out of the messages that you send, okay? Now, you don't need to be on Knives Edge efficiency here. You just need something that works, okay? So for every platform, it's going to be different. But for cold email, you should try and aim for 0.5 to 1%. That is scalable, okay? For Instagram, you should try and aim for 0.5 to 1%. I would say 1% is ideal. For Facebook, aim for at least 1 to 1.5% because automating scaling, that is a little bit difficult. Twitter, you aim for 0.5%. LinkedIn, you want to aim for 2%, okay? Now, with those numbers, you're probably saying, Josh, this isn't very attractive numbers, right? These are like super low, only like 1 in 50, 1 in 75, 1 in 100, okay? Even 1 in 200 in some cases. But here is the thing. when you have a predictable process and when it is actually proven and you can calculate the ROAS, right? Obviously it's not ads, but the ROI, I guess, right? You can calculate the ROI. It becomes very, very easy to see exactly how much money you're going to be making, okay? So number one, define that. Number two is you basically need to make a chain of action as to how this conversation and how this outbound approach is actually going to go, okay? So what phases does this person essentially need to pass through in order to be able to get to someone who's scheduling a call, right? So for my email sequence, right, it's essentially the first email, right? There's a call to action on that first email that gets them to a positive reply. Then I send the calendar, and then they book a call, right? So that could be one, there's two phases. Number one is email sent. Number two is positive reply, or I guess there's three, and then number three is appointment booked, okay? And between those three phases, there's essentially a series of actions that has to take place where they have to read the email and then reply, okay? The second series is they have to read the second email and then they have to book a call, okay? So map out exactly what those phases are, write that down on a piece of paper, you can write that down in the Google Doc, whatever you want. You need to have those phases built out, okay? Next is you need to actually write the copy for each one of those phases, okay? So we'll use the email example, right? Number one is basically going to be you pitching your product, showing them the value of that, and then the call to action, right? So you have to go ahead and write that email. There's tons of videos that I have on writing copy and writing cold email scripts and things like that that you can look at. But that's basically what you want to do there. And you want to write the different copy for every single set of stimuli, basically, or series of events that are going to happen. That's obviously not a word, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? And then once you have that, what happens then is you are going to test it, okay? So what you need to do is you need to send a minimum, and I mean a minimum of 500 outreach to know if this is actually working, okay? And you're going to test. You're not going to deviate. You're not going to test some random script for a little bit, right? You're going to test those chains of action that you have already built out, and you're going to see what the appointment booking rate is, okay? If your appointment booking rate is greater than or higher than the North Star that you set out at the very, very beginning, then what you can do is you can look to remove yourself, okay? So you can either do this in two ways, okay? If it's a more complex process, like cold calling, for example, you want to map out, it's a lot harder to delegate cold calling, full transparency, right? But if you want to do that, you have to map out, okay, what's the first thing that you say? What's the next thing that you say? Like every single part of the conversation, you have to SOP that, okay? Because you're going to have to give this to a VA, or you're going to have to give this to a cold calling setter, okay? This doesn't have to be a VA, this could be someone else, right? And you should have everything mapped out in a standard operating procedure that's like do this, then this, then this, then this, right? So it's basically like you're coding them almost, right? So that's the one way of doing it. Number two, with cold email, this works the best is you can automate it, okay? You can also do this with DMs. Like there's a ton of stuff that I use in terms of like automating Instagram DMs and things like that. But cold email is the easiest way to do this, right? So essentially what you could do is you could set up like Instantly that would now automatically send the emails. You can test with automatically sending cold emails too. Obviously that's a little bit tedious, right? But you can now, once you have that, right, you can actually start to automate it, right? And once you have things automated, you can scale it, okay? And when I say scale it, it's not complicated. It's just increasing the amount of volume. So if for cold email, you found that after sending 500 to 1,000, probably with email you want to do 1,000 cold emails, right? And you have a 0.7% booking rate, what you want to do now is you can just 10 times the amount of emails you're sending every single day, right? So as soon as you find that proof of concept, increase the amount of volume because it works, okay? And that's the same thing that I did, right? Is like I went through this process. I did the Instagram DM side of things. I was doing all this messaging. I was able to achieve a 1% booking rate. And then now I'm sending 600 DMs a day because I found a way to automate and scale that thing to the moon without me having to do anything whatsoever, okay? So again, if you want access to that, you can click that first link in the description. If not, it's completely fine. But other than that, I will see you in the next video.